Late last year, the EPA announced proposed changes to the Renewable Fuel Standard, or RFS. The agency suggested lowering the blending requirement of corn ethanol from 14.4 billion gallons a year to just more than 13 billion gallons per year. Its biomass-based diesel target would remain unchanged under the plan at 1.28 billion gallons for both 2014 and 2015. The proposal is still unapproved, but would lower total renewable fuel requirements by about 3 billion gallons. However, Secretary of Ag Tom Vilsack has said he expects the final numbers will be larger than the initial request. We've told you before that Nebraska plays a large role in ethanol as the nation's #2 producer. The state's soybean farmers produce a crop that can be incorporated into another fuel in the form of biodiesel. We recently talked with UNL Extension educator John Hay about the biodiesel industry and its status under the RFS.
The Renewable Fuel Standard today is kind of a year back. We have a requirement to blend a certain amount of biofuels into our petroleum transportation fuels. And every year, the EPA has set out the plans for the next year. And their 2014 plan has yet to be reported to us. And what's interesting about 2014 was that the EPA suggested a change in the RFS blending requirement that wasn't really all that expected, a reduction in the amount of corn ethanol to be blended, and some other reductions based on the fact that there's not a lot of cellulosic fuels and things out there. Now, the reality is, what are those numbers going to be? We don't know. Those numbers are still waiting to come out. It's going to be really interesting, and obviously biodiesel has a piece of that. There's a requirement to blend, in the 2013 numbers, 1.28 billion gallons of biodiesel into the market, and the 2014 numbers are likely to be higher than that, higher than 1.28 billion. We're not sure what they're going to be.
We've talked on this show before about the renewable identification numbers and the market for those almost separate, but what do they relate to, or how do they relate to biodiesel?
Yeah, the RINs, or the renewable identification numbers, are really an important piece to this whole thing because it's how the RFS tracks the blending. And so every gallon of biofuel that comes out gets a renewable identification number, and then that number follows it through to be blended. And that number has value, and it has value because if a required obligated party that's supposed to blend biofuel doesn't blend, then it has to buy a RIN number or a RIN credit from someone else, and so those have some trading value, and that trading value influences the price of those fuels. And so the RIN values are based somewhat on the BTU content of the fuel. So a biodiesel RIN has about 1.5 times the value of an ethanol RIN. And so a biodiesel gallon gets 1.5 RINs, and a biodiesel RIN today is worth about 50 cents.
Now there is not currently a blender's credit for biodiesel, correct?
There's not. The blender's credit is a subsidy that was $1 a gallon. It expired at the end of last year, and it hasn't been renewed, though there is talk that they're going to bring it up in the lame duck session coming up. We'll see what happens. If it does come up, it may come up and be retroactive to the year 2014, and then maybe go on 1 year into the end of 2015. We'll see what happens.
Tell me where the feedstocks are coming from for this.
Feedstocks on biodiesel have changed a little bit over time. One thing that hasn't changed is the predominance of soybean oil. Soybean oil is still the preferred product for that. It's very ubiquitous. There's a lot of it out there. But the access to distillers grains oil, or oil that's pulled off of distillers grains in the ethanol plant, is becoming more available. And the prices of that have been competitive, and they can get that and use it for biodiesel. Also, animal fats are still pretty common. So those are the three major feedstocks for biodiesel. And again, biodiesel plants are selecting their cheapest feedstock, and a lot of them are making it out of whatever they can get at the lowest price at the time. So as competition for one thing changes, they'll just buy something else.
You believe that the quality of biodiesel has increased or has gotten better, right?
I really do. I really see that the industry has worked very hard to make that quality better. There was a time, not that many years ago, where biodiesel there were some question marks on quality. In particular, the question marks on quality were in the gel point, or the point at which you plug up filters because of the cold temperatures. And animal fat biodiesel has a very high gel point, and then soybean biodiesel is still slightly higher than petroleum diesel, so that was a question mark. But the industry has really ramped up its patrol of those types of issues, as well as putting standards in place like the BQ 9000, and so the quality is much better than it was, and the industry really ramped up and did that themselves.
What about the economics? Is it profitable right now?
You know, the economics are interesting because it changes over time. You know, for the longest time, biodiesel was more expensive than diesel fuel because the feedstocks were pretty expensive, and making it, you add all that up and it was more expensive than diesel fuel. But today, it's really pretty close because of lower feedstock costs, because of lower costs of production. And then finally, this RIN value, which again, it's a 50-cent RIN, and it's not quite exactly worth 50 cents if we add it into the whole thing, but it makes a big difference. And that 50-cent RIN is the difference now, and today, biodiesel is probably lower cost than regular diesel, and so what the oil industry has done, or what the diesel industry has done, is it's blending some into a majority or a lot of our fuels. So a lot of the fuel we use today, you go to the regular diesel pump and you fill diesel, there might be 1% to 2% biodiesel in that fuel. And they are able to do that because the fuel is not substantially different, still meets ASTM regs, and they say that they don't have to label unless it's over 5%.
We'll update you on new RFS numbers when they're finalized.